Hey, it's Reimmerse. It's month 23. It's March, so one more month till 2 years, and this month was a roller coaster. It was had some highlights and some things that are a little weird, and I think a lot's going to change. I know I kind of did a bit more of a dramatic thumbnail here, but this one's going to be kind of long. I'll try to do timestamps. We'll see. I don't know how hard that will be, but just my plan is I'm going to start by talking about kind of my immersion this month, and then kind of a lot of my like basic notes from the month, and then near the end, I'm gonna go through. Matt vs Japan came back. I don't know if you guys know who he is. He was gone for like 3 years, so I have a lot to say about this. And then he has some new thoughts on like how he thinks language learning should be done, and I think they sound pretty interesting. So I want to discuss them and kind of how I'm going to change my strategy going forward. So that's the plan, and let's just get straight into it. So this month. We did finally hit the hour of active immersion average per day. And so that's been the goal for a couple months here. And so it feels pretty good to hit that. And that's actually despite having like a week here where I was on vacation and wasn't really getting a lot of time in. And most of this was really due to like reading. So I was doing a lot more reading, especially with this like DD's podcast. So here I can just kind of leave these, and we'll talk about that in a sec. So yeah, all my passive was from the podcast, the active immersion, also from Netflix again. And these look a little weird. Anyways, I did a lot of podcasts this month. So I've been using Kimchi Reader, which is nice. And basically I loaded all the DD's podcast transcripts into Kimchi Reader, and then I would just read through them, and then whenever there's like a word you don't know, you can mark it as unknown and like read the definition. And then I would like read through them and see if I, sometimes it would take me a couple times and kind of go through them. And then after I read through them, I would listen to them passively or just kind of watch the video in real time. And, obviously your comprehension's a lot better after like going through it much more slowly. By the way, I'm going to have my notes on screen. In the past, I've had them on a separate monitor, but I think it should be kind of nice for you guys to read along and also just have something to look at. So I was doing a lot of these with a friend of mine, and I found it actually like pretty helpful. I really felt like I was learning, and I had heard to kind of provide context and corrections. So this first episode I did, the Proverbs episode, I wrote it took me 3 times before it really clicked. But I was really like excited. Like my plan was to do one of these like every day, and I did it for like a week. And so I would like read one every day, and then I would kind of listen to them passively after I'd gone through them. And so the first time I did like listen back, like it's really cool to listen to like a 15-minute podcast and really understand it all. And there's this concept of like shadowing and preparing for output, and there's kind of this idea that like you really need to, and Refold's talked about this, like the idea of like virtually understanding virtually everything being said. And like this was like the first time where I like listened to this podcast, and I was like, wow, like this is like 15 minutes of Korean where I understood virtually everything being said. So the plan was to do one per day. And I think I'd like learn a lot around like the culture topics. But there's a little bit of a problem. So while Didi does have a very clear voice, they talk about this in like adopting a parent, where basically you really want to have like a parent who's the same like gender and age as you, because you're gonna end up sounding like them. And basically, my friend Amber, who's Korean, she was like, I was reading this, and she's like, your voice sounds like kind of feminine, right? And I'm like, oh, and then I like play the clip of like Didi, right? The like actual podcast. And she's like, wow, you sound exactly like Didi. She's like, your Korean accent is perfect, except you sound like a woman. So, there's nothing wrong with having a feminine voice, but I don't think that's my goal. So the other thing is that, I think this was definitely exaggerated when I was like reading the podcast, because when I was reading the podcast, I was reading it like I've like heard it, right? Where if I'm like reading just some random Korean sentence, I don't think I like say it as much as like Didi. But when you're reading something that you've heard like someone read before, like maybe there's like an audiobook, right? And if you're like quoting a line from an audiobook, you're like probably more likely to say it how like the like person reading the audiobook read it. And I also like didn't want to try to like just try to force like a lower pitch or more masculine voice, because you really don't want to like guess what that sounds like, because you're going to guess wrong. So my thinking was like basically it wouldn't be that bad, like whatever it was, but because like the DD content was like a really good level and it was really engaging for me, that like it'd be fine, and then later I could just fix it. Because Matt vs. Japan had talked about like people who learn Japanese from anime, they basically start by sounding like anime characters and they're able to fix it. So that was my plan. And yeah, I kind of skipped over here this part. Kimchi Reader is pretty nice. It's much more like independent, where you can just like email the guy. It's just like one guy. And it's a lot more like open, where like Migaku like removed the ability to like export stuff. So in order to move my like learned like words from Migaku, I had to like go into the code and like pull out this like SQLite database and then like export it with code. It was kind of a pain in the ass. But anyways, the plan was to start doing a kind of like monthly Korean speaking segment, which is from this like Matt vs. Japan video on like preparing to output. But let's see. This is supposed to be due here. I'm kind of very sporadic this month. I'm sorry. Anyways, okay, next point. I do genuinely feel like I'm at the refold. You should understand virtually everything being said with DD episodes, which are non-trivial content. But then, yeah, and then I rewatched like this drama called like Best Mistake. Drama. And I mean, this is like a very easy web drama. It's like one of the first things I watched, and I felt like I was like lost half the time, which was like pretty bad. So that was this month. And then near the end, yeah, Matt vs. Japan came back. This was 2 weeks ago. So if you guys don't like know what happened, basically, yeah, Matt, he like came on the scene maybe like 10 years ago, following a lot of like AJAT stuff. If you don't know what AJAT is, AJAT, AJATT, all Japanese all the time.com. And he was like one of the people who really pushed like immersion learning content, especially on YouTube. And this was very fundamental for me when I started getting into language learning. And he made a lot of like really, really interesting videos. And then he founded this company called Mass Immersion Approach, or MIA. And he did that with this guy Yoga, and Yoga is the guy who runs Migaku. And then they like had a falling out, and then Matt made this company called Refold, which you guys have seen a lot before. And then Matt left Refold, and Refold's like its independent, this own like independent thing now. And then Matt went on to do this like a bunch of like very scammy stuff with this guy here, Ken Cannon. And by scammy, I mean like he like did a bunch of like really kind of like scummy marketing bullshit, like, and it felt like he was really just trying to like rip everyone like out of like money. And he like stopped posting YouTube videos, and yeah, he did a bunch of bullshit where it's like I remember seeing his like emails where it's like there's like this like secret that's like infecting your Japanese, and his course is the only way to fix it, and there's only 100 spots, and it like expires tomorrow and it's $1,000. So yeah. And anyways, yeah, he disappeared for 3 years. And anyways, he shows up 2 weeks ago and makes this video where he's basically like, I fucked up. He's like, I'm sorry. And he admits that the marketing was bullshit. He admits that King Cannon was like a bad person to work with. And yeah, it is pretty crazy. I was not expecting that. Hopefully, I think he's earned some forgiveness. I think he's got to like prove himself that he's not trying to, he's staying on the right path going forward. But he's back, and he has a lot of new like thoughts on language learning. So he has this like new Matt vs. Japan's Immersion Dojo, which I did pay. I subscribed for 1 month, and he has a lot of thoughts on like he calls it like his Matt vs. Japan method like 4.0, where like if like 1.0 was AJAT, and then 2.0 was like these like 10-year-old videos, and then 3.0 he like said is like the Refold guide, which is what I've been following. He says 4.0 is the new method. So I'm going to tell you guys, I paid $18, and I'm going to go over 4.0 and what I think and what I'm going to change. So he made this video, this most recent video, which is not performing very well compared to his old stuff, honestly. But he talks about there was this guy who learned like Thai, and he had this like school in Thailand called ALG, and he basically the school in ALG was this like hyper optimized immersion school. So they had like students that go five hours a day every day, and there'd be like 2 teachers, and the rules, and the teachers would speak only in Thai, and the rules for the students were no speaking like in Thai, no notes, no dictionaries, no questions, and no analyzing. And yeah, you're like wow, right? Like what the fuck? I mean, like that's like everything people like try to do when they're studying something, right? And it's also anyways, let's see. And so okay, Matt's new like model, like mental model, is based around this idea. He pulls it from this book. It's called like Thinking Fast, like Fast and Slow. And he talks about, and yeah, he even acknowledged that like a lot of the of this book is like based on some research which was later like not able to be reproduced. So the like, you know, it's a little questionable. But anyway, so yeah, there's this like system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is like unconscious, instinctive actions, and system 2 is like slower, deliberate, conscious stuff. So when you like speak in your native language, this is system 1, right? You don't really have to think about the language. It just kind of comes out. Another example, like if you're like driving, right? Like when you start driving, it starts as like a system 2 thing, right? You're thinking about every little action. It's very conscious. And then over time, right, you can kind of like be kind of tired in the morning, and you like just get to work, and you're like, I don't even know how the fuck I got here, right? It's just kind of automatic. So 3.0 was basically mainly system 1 with system 2 as support, delays output. And then he goes on to say, like, here, I'll try to like go in order. I have a lot here. But he later says that, or like he goes on to say that like this 3.0 method, which is the method like he like taught, right? He pushed, and Refold's currently pushing. He says that like this really isn't enough to reach like native level. Which isn't to say that like people like aren't doing well, but he like kind of implies that this is like people aren't that good, or not that like they're not that good. They're just not like excellent speakers. And so he pulls away these like 3 conclusions, right? So first is that this ALG method, which he sees as like ideal, like he sees as this like really optimal case study of like what like ideal immersion learning looks like, is like exclusively system 1, right? There's because all of this stuff is system 2 stuff, speaking, notes, dictionaries, questions, analyzing. Like the guy in ALG, he talks about like, there's this idea of like trying to like think about the language versus just like thinking about the meaning. And he basically says that like anytime you're trying to like break down the grammar or like understand it, other than just like letting the meaning like come to you, that this is like system 2. And there was this comment, I wrote this later down, but basically this was a YouTube comment. And so it was talking about these like terrible 5. And in the video, Matt says all these terrible 5 can be summed down to the terrible 1, which is no thinking. Like I go, so the end result of this is no thinking. We've like thought this to death over like, and now we're back to magic, which like I agree. It's like, does feel like, okay, yeah, just like don't think, just like learn. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't even make any fucking sense. Anyways, it does actually make sense, but like it feels kind of bullshit. Anyways, okay. Matt draws 3 conclusions. So the 3 conclusions, conclusion 1 is that ALG is purely system 1. Refold is mainly 1, supported by 2. And like the 1 is like, you know, like immersion, like the kind of like letting the language wash over you. And the supported by 2 is like, you know, using dictionaries, SRS kind of stuff. And he says that ALG gives better results than Refold. And the guy who was like behind ALG, he like even acknowledges this because he like didn't learn through ALG. He learned through like kind of dictionary style, like more like study style methods at first. And he says, when I speak in Thai, and this guy, he'd like been in Thailand for like decades, right? Like even people said he had like native level output. He says, when I speak in Thai, I think in Thai. And when I speak in English, I think only in thought. I pay no attention to English. So Matt concludes that using system 2 as support harms your results. And there's like this distinction later on that like by results, there's like 2 different things. There's like, you may like sound like native level to other people, but that like speaking the other language will never feel as like natural as your native language, because of this like implicit like system 2. Anyways, okay. Conclusion 2. So Matt has a lot of like, and later I'll get to like what he like says why he like changed his mind. He has a bunch of like case studies. So there's this guy, Will Hart, who's like friend or like British, I think. I don't know. He like learned Chinese, and he got like ALG level, like excellent results. And apparently, okay, early phonetic training with early output can counteract the negative effects of System 2 support. Because basically like, anyways, okay. Conclusion 3, there are benefits to System 2 support. Doesn't require perfectly ideal input, makes the process faster, makes the process less frustrating. The ideal method minimizes the negative effects of System 2 while maximizing benefits. So basically like ALG is like ideal, right? Where you like have like 2 teachers who have been like trained in this, right? They're giving you like perfect comprehensible input every single day. It's right in front of you, so you have like no choice not to pay attention. They know the skill level you're at, and there's like no way out of it, right? So this is like super ideal. But that we can basically like never like get to this without like a school like that, and that's like not really probable or like possible. So given that that's not possible, using System 2 for like support can really help like bridge the gap with unideal input, and can also make things faster, because obviously like adults are like smart, using like dictionaries, using like analyzing can kind of help. Okay, so he presents this new like Matt versus Japan method 4.0. And so there's like 2 versions. There's Platinum and Gold. So Platinum is the best results, but it's more challenging to execute. And Gold is almost as good results, but it's easier to execute. And basically the difference is that with Platinum, you don't read until you have spoken fluency, and with Gold, you learn to read. And this is like more important in like Japanese, where like kanji is like a significant part of learning the language. So like the idea that you like wouldn't learn to read until like completely after spoken fluency is like kind of a much bigger deal, where with Korean, I don't think it is as much. But basically he says, reading directly engages System 2 because you go at your own pace. So basically the idea is that like there's like the System 1, System 2, right? And like the way Matt puts it is that anytime you use System 2, this is bad, because like your native language is all System 1, and that's what makes it feel native. It's completely System 1. And so you want to learn it through System 1. And all these like System 2 things are like bad, because they like put like instill the language via System 2 pathways. And that the only way to have the language truly, the second language truly System 1, like your native language, is to not learn it through any System 2 pathways, and just to like learn it exclusively through System 1 pathways, which is basically like listening to full speed speech. And so he says that because like reading, and specifically like the kind of reading I was doing, right, where you're going extremely slowly, you're looking up like every word that you don't know and reading like an English definition and like trying to like force 100% comprehension, says that this is really bad because it directly engages System 2. Where instead, like speaking is so fast, you have no choice but to basically only get System 1. So he says you start by priming. So you do like ear training. And ear training I'll get to in a second. This is going to be really big. Then you go to stage 2, which is listening. And you're doing no subs or just like hover subs for lookups and mining. And you're doing all like just listening. And then you're doing this is for like around 500 active hours, which is not a lot, right? Like most of the time before like output before in traditional refold, you'd be looking at like 1,000, 2,000 hours. But now he's saying after like 500 hours, you can start speaking, even at like only 50% understanding of basic slice of life shows, which is like where I would be at. And then the big thing with output is you can get this like corrected output or controlled output, which I'll talk about later. So you should have an input-output ratio of 5:1. By the end of stage 3, you're fluent in the spoken language. And then you move on to reading, which is like kanji for people learning Japanese. Okay. There was a note about like live input, like the fact that the ALG classes are like in person, like live in front of you, makes them like more engaging, or like live streams are like more engaging than like recorded content. Anyways, okay. System 2 damage is unfixable. That's what Matt says. And this part was kind of crazy because like, Matt was like pushing, or I think I wrote this like down here in my like reactions. I understand that like fields like take time to optimize, right? Like there's always this pursuit of like knowledge and understanding. And Like if you consider like medicine, for example, or computer science, right? Like if you look at those fields like 50 years ago, right? They're like basically incomparable, right? It's like a completely different stuff. Everything's been revolutionized. Like we're much more successful. We're much more efficient. And so, you can imagine like in the field of like language learning methodology, we learn, but it is kind of crazy to tell all these people who invested like thousands of hours based on, his videos and his old method. He says like, basically, he literally says, I think like you're completely fucked. Like not like you're completely fucked, but he basically says that like, if like once something is like system 2, it can't go back. And he does like acknowledge there's like this idea of like this like spectrum of system 1 and system 2. And he describes this idea of like a ceiling, right? Where here, I think this is in the concrete section. Where is concrete? Here. Okay. Here, idea of a ceiling based on like how much system 2 you use. So in your native language, you have like, you're 100% system 1, right? So your like ceiling is like 100%. And he basically says that like, as you use like system 2, your like ceiling for how much system 1 you can have kind of like drops, and it never really comes back. And he talks about this idea of like what you say versus how you say it, where he's basically saying like, what you say can change, but like the way the language like feels when you achieve fluency, like is basically how it will feel forever. And he says that like, using system 2 kind of like lowers this ceiling. And the ALG guy says that, and even this like super optimized ALG said the average ceiling was like 95%. And so you can imagine like the average immersion learner who's like, doing a lot of like system 2 stuff, it might be even lower apparently. I don't know. But I just thought the funny part was he basically says that this is like unrecoverable. It's like not possible to undo this damage. He says that like it's possible to like brute force system 2, like change habits, but it's not possible to like convert it back into system 1. And a good example of this is like pitch accent, right? Like he said that like, he achieved fluency, right, without ever like learning pitch accent. And he basically said that like it would be impossible to ever go back. Like even if you like, he like fluent, right? Even with like decades, like years of more immersion, it's not like you just like suddenly are able to figure out pitch accent. And so he said that's possible to like system 2, like force yourself to learn pitch accent, but like that has to be a system 2 thing. Anyways, okay. Doesn't think we should go for pure comprehensible input approach to like a JLG because we don't have access to dedicated teachers or ideal content. So he acknowledges that like there is some like, compromises that need to be done. So in this like priming stage, you talked about ear training. And so ear training is really important. He says, and it should take a few months, 20 to 30 minutes per day. And basically the concept of ear training is like, the hard part of language, I guess, is like, the extreme amount of vocab and phrases and like meaning, right? And one part of language is like listening and pronunciation, but that like those are like very isolated parts. So you can imagine, like let's say you're like a native English speaker, right? And I say some like gibberish. I say like badably beaglebort, right? You could probably like repeat that exactly as I said it with a perfect accent, because like the thing with gibberish is like gibberish doesn't mean anything, but it uses only English sounds. And so even though it doesn't mean anything, you can repeat it back having heard it with a perfect accent every time, right? And any native speaker can do this. So the idea with this like ear training is that by the end, you should be able to repeat any sentence regardless of understanding with a like near native level accent, which is really interesting to think about. Like in one of the videos he talked about like there's like this I think it was from like Family Guy or some like TV show where there's like a like Spanish speaker and the only sentence he knows is like, I don't know how to speak English, but like he says it like a perfect American accent, right? But he doesn't like actually know what it means, doesn't like or like know any other English, just that he knows how to say like, I don't know how to speak English in like a perfect American accent. And the way to do this is through like chorusing, where there's this like refold chorusing, this video, which I am planning on doing, and we'll get to that later. But basically, it's kind of like shadowing. It's a little bit different than shadowing. Where shadowing, you're like, you like hear a sentence and you like kind of like say what you're hearing like a second behind. Like chorusing, extremely small units of audio, like 2 to 3 seconds, maybe 5 to 10, and you're saying it exactly real time, and you're like literally trying to optimize. Like you're just focusing on sound. And what's interesting is that because we're like with meaning, there's like so many words, like literally hundreds of thousands of words in language, right? But with sounds, there's usually like a finite number of sounds, like literally like under 100, right? And so with like very few snippets of audio, maybe 20 to like 50, you can probably get every single sound in the language. And there's this thing, I don't know if it's called semantic like saturation or satiation. This probably happens. This happens to me sometimes where you like say a word and then it like in your head, it like, you like know what that word means, but like you like say it out loud and it like sounds like really weird and you just like keep saying it and it's just like sound, right? And you're like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know. I don't know if you guys have ever had that happen, but you just like say a word and you just like realize that's just like a random like kind of weird sound. And basically chorusing like induces this, right? You're trying to completely not interpret the meaning and just focus exclusively on the sound. And this has like a very important connection to like the early output later, which I guess I can touch on now. The idea is basically that before the thinking was, or I guess I'll say this for later. I'll say this for the output part. Okay, but this is something that you want to do early and is disconnected from like your like level of like understanding the language. Okay. There's this wet versus dry concrete analogy. So this is kind of like the like ceiling, where it's basically like your model of the language like starts wet and dries over time, and like once it's dry, you like it's very hard to change things. So let's see. Okay, wet. Under 2 years, when you're still acquiring the language, you don't consciously try to think about form, just think about meaning. Using System 2 to try to deeply understand the language will harm acquisition. So I think this is kind of like stuff where it's like trying to like assign like rules or like understand the language is like not ideal. Like you just want to just like, I don't even know, honestly. Okay. Output with corrections prevents things from falling through the cracks and primes brain to notice more. We'll talk about this in a second. Okay, and then dry is like the fallback if something went wrong. So again, this is like and Matt says you have to like take it into your own hands here. So like let's say you like we're never really like using pitch accent but you're like 3 years in learning Japanese, you've never looked at pitch accent. Well, like now your model of Japanese is like kind of like the concrete has dried. So you have to like more immersion is not going to fix your pitch accent problem because like you can't re-wet the concrete. Like your model of Japanese internally like already like doesn't include pitch accent, but it's like possible to like take it into your own hands and use System 2, but it will like Matt even talks about how like automated System 2 is never the same as like true System 1, which I'm not even sure like the original book. I haven't read it, but anyways, okay. Monolingual transition. He talks about how like ChatGPT can be useful for this. Now he says bilingual dictionaries are bad. I agree. Like one of the things, again, this like terrible 5, like he says like this kind of stuff where like just reading like English words kind of gives you like false associations. So the stuff he says is like pretty bad. Okay, repetition. This is like repeating content you've watched. Beneficial but overrated. Dangerous to force 100% comprehension of a single piece of content because it uses System 2. So this is basically what I was doing with DD's content, right? Like I was reading these transcripts over and over until I like got like 100% comprehension. And I guess this is like really a lot of System 2, and this is not ideal. Anyways, okay, output. So this is probably the most interesting part. Let's see. So, or where's the part where it's like why? Here, okay. Let's first talk about why you should output early, and then we'll go into like what you should do when you output. Okay, so why you should output early. So Matt says you should output early because it can minimize the damage that System 2 can cause. And so you have to use System 2 a bit, like even ELJ can fully prevent. And System 2 is always habit forming. you make false connections, right? Because these like dictionaries, you're like, even if you like don't try, you're like you like create these conscious pathways to try to like interpret grammar in like some like way, right? Like your brain like is trying to figure it out. Okay, makes you acquire input faster. There's this idea that like outputting like kind of like primes your brain to like raises your input sensitivity, stimulates acquisition when you receive corrective feedback. Okay, there's this idea that like if you don't output early enough, that like this is like a problem. And like he describes it as like, okay, this fart theory of output. If you hold it in too long, it eventually goes away. Although with language, it doesn't come back later. And this is like this like happens to heritage speakers. So like heritage speakers is like, let's say you like have two like Korean parents and you're Korean American, and your parents like always speak to you in Korean, and you can like speak Korean growing up. And then at some point you just like start speaking, like you go to school and you start speaking English, and then you like start speaking English back to your parents, and like they only speak to you in Korean, but like you only speak to them in English. And then at some point you just like completely lose the ability to speak Korean. And sometimes these people like they literally like they could say like only like annyeonghaseyo, right? And like that's literally it. Like they can understand it, but they like can't say anything. And the mechanisms for this are interesting, but like it implies that like even if you can understand, this isn't enough to be able to speak. And he says that like the brain adapts only to what it is needed to survive. And so like if you are able to get away with like talking to your parents in English, then your brain kind of just like tosses away the like speaking part of your understanding of that language, and you kind of like trick yourself into thinking that the tardive language is like let's say you learn Japanese from anime, like your brain just is, and you like never speak to anyone for 2 years, your brain's like, oh, like Japanese is just a tool for like understanding anime. It's not like an actual way to like communicate. And let's see. This is a bigger problem for immersion learners because they don't get hyper engaging experiences like at ALG. So like at ALG, you like go into a classroom every day and you like see these like two teachers like talking in Thai in front of you and like doing like games and skits and stuff every day for 5 hours. So you like, it's very clear that like this is a tool to like communicate. But if you're just like watching TV shows, like it's like more of a problem. I thought it was really interesting that like Matt admits that he like basically fear mongered output. Like, I mean, it was like his like belief at the time, but it led to people having a lot of output anxiety. People set a very high bar for themselves on when they should start outputting. That includes me right here. And he said that like even if they have enough acquisition, so he was like saying that like even at like 500 hours, this is like a good time where there's like output that can like start to come out. But he basically says that like people like kind of like shut this down, and then this kind of like leads to problems. He also says that it gives you like identity gains. So this is like, I said language and identity are very closely tied. The more you identify with the target language culture, the more imitation comes naturally. And in order to this, you need to interact with native speakers. So this is super true, right? Like if you like spend like 2-3 years in your room, it's like kind of hard to connect with the culture or like make friends. Okay, so why do you change his mind? So there's like a couple points here. So one, he didn't understand the problem of pronunciation can be taken on early on with ear training as opposed to thousands of hours of input. So the idea before was that like, in order to have really good pronunciation, you needed to have thousands of hours of input, and like the thousands of hours of input is required to like, get like the like understanding and the acquisition. But like, along the way, you'll kind of like get thousands of hours of ear training. And the reason this was important is because like the ear training is, or the like pronunciation is like an extremely big part of output. So Matt like talks about this like video where he like critiqued this like Japanese learner's like speech, and it was like this like woman, and he was literally stopping like almost on every word because there was like a subtle like problem with her like accent or nuance or pitch. And what this means is like when you start talking, like even if you're working with a tutor, there's so many problems, like literally every single word, there's like a pronunciation, and it's not like you wouldn't be understood, right? But it's not like perfect. There's so many problems that it becomes like impossible to fix. And so the idea was just like, don't speak, get like really have a really strong understanding, and you'll like fix the ear training stuff through thousands of hours of input. But basically, there's the new idea is that if you do like dedicated ear training, that this can be done in isolation. It doesn't require thousands of hours. It only requires like tens of hours. And then in like just a couple months, you can have perfect pronunciation, so that even though your like acquisition isn't as high, that when you like say things, it's actually like realistic, for someone to correct every mistake you have, right? Like, let's say you like say something and there's like, you like misused one word and you had like one grammar mistake in like a, 10-second sentence. Well, then your teacher can like actually correct that. But if everything else, if your pronunciation was perfect, then it's realistic for to have every mistake corrected. Okay. You didn't understand that using System 2 causes permanent damage. The thinking was that System 2 scaffolding would just kind of naturally fall away. But he basically says that even if this is like true, that automated System 2 is like never the same as like fully like automatic System 1. He also underestimated the role of identity. And then also he talks about this like case studies. So he said like, it's been like 5 years since I started making all these videos. A lot of people have done this. And none of the people that strictly waited to output actually got that good. And all the people who are really good outputted relatively early on. Again, this is where it's like kind of fucked up, right? Like, let's say you like watched these map videos like 5 years ago and you spent 5 years and like 2,000 hours learning Japanese. And just for Matt to tell you like, sorry, I got this wrong. Like your Japanese is like permanently fucked, right? That's kind of crazy. So anyways, okay, given output, what you do. Okay, preparation. Shadowing is good, but after your training coursing. So we talked about your training. This is like having perfect pronunciation. And then you can start shadowing. Good after 500 hours. I think I'm like here. He said shadowing is like more for the vibe, where coursing is like very detailed. And this can kind of get you into the flow of speaking full sentences, speaking multiple sentences in a row. He still thinks adopting a parent is good, but he no longer says it needs to be like all of your input. It can be like 10%. Also having a couple parents. He no longer recommends speaking before writing. And this is super interesting because this was like on the Refold guide, they talk about like writing as like a good way to like get into output. But he basically says that like output should always be System 1, right? Like you really don't want to be thinking about what you're saying. This like never happens in your native language. But like writing and is very much System 2, right? You're like, it's very slow, it's very methodical, it's very conscious. You're like, slowly typing things out. You can go back and correct words before you send it. And so writing trains yourself to really heavily rely on System 2. So this is super interesting. Okay, he really talks about this idea of like controlled output or like corrected output. So you can do this with a native tutor or friend. They only speak the target language to you. You speak back the target language when it flows. When it doesn't flow, you respond in English. And the native speaker provides corrective feedback in the form of recasts, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay, the mindset. Try to rely on what you acquired. It can like take some time. Like sometime, like something in your native language will be like on the tip of your tongue. So it's okay if like it doesn't come out immediately. Ask yourself, what would a native say? This avoids the foot gun of like, there's this whole like problem of like, there are like thoughts in English that like don't exist in other languages, or there are thoughts in other languages that don't exist in English. And so you like don't really want to do these translations. You want to like think natively in the other language. Okay, when you get corrected, don't think about the why, just accept that's like how you say it. Don't try to get System 2 involved too much. Okay, so corrective feedback. There's 3 different types. There's explicit correction, which is where you like point out the error, maybe provide an explanation. So like, let's say I'm like, I will going to the store. And then the person would be like, wrong, is I will go to the store. And that's because it's like the like past, present, future, potential tense. I don't know. I'm not a grammar teacher. Okay, that's explicit correction. Next is prompting. So native encourages learner to self-correct by signaling an error was made. So this is like, I'm like, I am going to the, or I'm go to the store. And then the teacher's like, you're go to the store? Are you sure you're go to the store? And then you're like, oh, I'm going to the store. But this triggers System 2, right? Because you're like consciously thinking about like what you did wrong or something. And then there's recast, which is native reformulates incorrect utterances correctly, but with explicitly pointing out the mistake. So this is like when you're like trying not to be rude, right? So like the learner is like, I'm go to the store later. And then you're like, oh, you're going to the store later. Like, that sounds fun. Like, where else are you going? And so he says that like this is like the best for acquisition. Okay. Not all output needs to be controlled. This is super interesting because this implies like, again, this was like some of the like really big worries about output was that like you're going to form these bad habits or like, anyways, he says the important thing is to avoid bad habits, but habits take time to form. So if you're getting corrective feedback often enough, it should be enough to catch mistakes before they form into habits, right? So this is like implies that if you're like doing corrective feedback with like a tutor 2 times a week, you can still like call your friends every day, and hopefully not form these bad habits. And he also talks about like making cards for these like mistakes you get. Okay. What you want in a language tutor. He talks about like this idea of like caretaker speech, where like, when people move to a foreign country, children do better than adults. And it's because like people talk to children differently. Like if they don't respond, it's like, okay, where adults are like expected to respond. And if you like tell something to an adult and they don't understand, you just like give up. You're like, they don't understand. But with like a child, like it's like kind of even subconsciously, yeah, you like just talk to them differently. You like simplify your speech. So he says, okay, italki teacher should talk in target language, talk about the here and now, do not necessarily expect answers, do not give up, speak in short sentences, speak loudly and clearly without failing. Okay. Let's see. I think that's everything. There was here one comment. I'm not sure about this permanent damage stuff. It sounds convincing, but I feel like there's more to it. There's tons of near native level English speakers, and we all learn it in the traditional way in school. And by the traditional way, he means like the textbook, grammar study method. And this is like a very interesting counter example to Matt's argument, right? Where Matt's argument is like, once you learn stuff through system 2, it's not possible to there's like permanent damage. But this guy is basically saying like there are lots of immigrant speakers who learned through the like even worse way than the Matt versus Japan method, like the refold method 2.0, 3.0. Even though we really all learn it through immersion traditionally. But this is true. This speculation, I feel like the underlying problem is wanting to sound perfect native. From what I've heard, you really do seem like a guy that wants to be perfect, thus you care about mistakes. Native speakers don't do that. Native speakers just say things and sometimes blurt out something that's technically wrong, where people get what you mean and move on. You don't want to be perfect and make any mistakes. Then you consciously make sure to use the proper grammar, words, pitch, which distracts you and results in words output. This can be compared to being in the zone where you don't consciously think about what you're doing. And then a response to this was Krashen talks about this a lot and refers to it as a psychological effect. It says that everyone has the ability within themselves to speak other language perfectly or near perfectly. But if you imagine yourself as an outsider, you end up focusing on all your conscious knowledge of the language to pretend you're a native instead of using your unconscious ability you've acquired. He links it to an actor playing the role of a character person in comparison to the actual character person. The actor will never truly come across the same as the person they're pretending to be. So this stuff is interesting because like it again, this one. Right? Like we're like decades into this, and the best we have is like, it's magic, right? Just don't try to think. Like when you're learning, don't think. When you're outputting, don't think. Which like doesn't feel helpful at all. But I do think that like the output stuff does seem pretty compelling to me. Specifically the ear training stuff and the corrective feedback stuff, because basically the ear training, like, pronunciation is really important. I like the idea that I can like get that out of the way up front. And I also like the idea of outputting earlier, right? Like I've been like really like pushing away output, and I've been like waiting until I like reach some point, which I've like keep pushing back because I don't feel like I'm there yet. And so I really like the idea that like now it feels like, oh, like it's okay. And I even like encouraged output early. And so even if my like, comprehension isn't as high, like, outputting is great, especially because I'm going to Korea in like a year. And yeah, in terms of like the like system 2, like hard concrete stuff, I still think like my concrete's pretty wet. Cause he says it's like under 2 years, and that's like, I have like my numbers are probably less than like the average immersion learner. So I think we're not past the point of no return here, but I think it's a good pivot opportunity. So here's what I'm going to change. Going to do a big focus on pronunciation ear training coursing. So I really want to reach this point again, where I can hear like a Korean sentence and repeat it back, at a near native level. And I think this is totally doable in like a month if I like course like 30 minutes every day. Because Matt talks about like this can be done in like 1 to 3 months, and that's with like a brand new learner. So I think this can be done in like a month. And I think this is really helpful because I've definitely like used the written language as a crutch, 100%. Like, because the thing is, any native speaker, if you like tell them a word that they haven't heard before, they can like they don't need, like, sometimes it can be helpful to ask like, oh, how is this spelled, right? But they don't need you to write it down to be able to like internalize it and use it. Where when someone like tells me, like, I have a friend, right, and they'll like tell me a word, it literally sounds like I have to have them like write it down for me to even like internalize it. And I think this is because my like listening is just really behind. And I also think like pronunciation is super important. So I'd really like to be, at like native level imitation by the end of the month, which sounds like a lot, but apparently it can be done. And then the next thing I'm doing is we're not doing any reading, no reading, and no subtitles on all of the immersion content. So the reading, again, is all system 2, so that's all going to go. And then completely going to get rid of subtitles, and just all system 1 listening. And then finally, I'm going to be preparing for controlled output. So really the preparing is like this kind of stuff, maybe some like shadowing near the end of the month. And we're not going to be doing any like texting. We're just going to be like talking with italki tutors or friends. So some pretty big changes. But I think this is good. One, like, again, Matt's not some like scientist. He's not a like linguist. I mean, he's like a linguist in the like casual sense. But I'm sure, the methodology will be continued to like evolve and improve. But I do think like I think Matt has been doing this for a long time. And I think he also like, has like, he's given this advice and like seen the results of a lot of people over a couple of years. And so I'm inclined to think what he says now is probably better than what he had to say before. And again, I also like really like the idea of outputting earlier and not like feeling like I need to wait. Yeah, kind of a lot, but I feel good. I feel good. So thank you all for staying with me. I know this is a long video. If you have thoughts on this, I'm really curious. If you have thoughts on like Matt vs. Japan being back, if you think he's still like a scammer, if you think he's redeemed, if you have like thoughts on this like methodology stuff, if you're gonna be changing something, just let me know. I'll still be here, and I'll be back for 2 years. Hopefully, I will have a super cool pronunciation, super cool accent in a month, and I'll let you guys know. So that's all. See you next month, and peace. Bye. Annyeong.